Hi everyone, I'm Shakun Batra and I'm here to answer questions for Red Sparrow, uh, questions under lockdown. I have a few questions here that you guys have sent and I'm going to try and answer them to the best of my capability. Well, yes, I do always think of the inner conflict. In fact, both my films, I think the inner conflict plays a more important role than the external conflict. And I think that's how you also make characters who are more real and relatable, is when they have something within them that needs to be resolved and not just externally. So for me, the external plot is important, but what's more important is the inner journey, and that's how you get catharsis. You know, when we talk about a character arcs and catharsis of a character, you are generally trying to graft that inner conflict to a point where they come face to face with that demon, and they have to face that. You know, and I think we'll talk more about it as we go into other questions, because there's some more questions here that where I'll be talking more about inner conflict and how it helps. Unfortunately, Fawad wasn't my first choice. I did not know of him at that point. I think he had just moved to India, and we had some difficulty trying to cast. But once I found Fawad, I knew that it was meant to be. The reasons that nothing worked out because I was meant to work with him, and he was so good. I don't think anybody, and I truly mean this, I don't think anybody could have replaced him in the film, or what he brought to the project. So I'm grateful to the universe that I had to wait to get Fawad for my film. Well, the thought of not having them end up together was to, try put a spin. At that time, a lot of romantic comedies were coming out, and the idea was to kind of do something that is slightly more unconventional, so it doesn't fall into the typical, the typical conventional way of doing a romantic comedy. And I'm also, as you know, a huge fan of Annie Hall, where two of them don't end up together. And that movie kind of inspired me to go in that direction. And when I met Karan, the first draft of that film had both of them end up together. And when I met Karan, we were both wondering that something's not right. And then he was like, I was like, we could possibly go in this direction where they don't end up together. And he was the first one to be like, yeah, let's make it happen. And I think that's how we got there. You see, sometimes inspiration starts in a very small way. So I remember for Kapoor and Sons, before this, I was already working on a story idea, which was a coming out of the closet story, which I couldn't finish, and I wasn't happy with what I was doing with it. And then after that, Aisha and I thought that we should try to a family story, and then we had to define every character in the family. And because I was already working on a coming out of the closet story, we thought, why don't we take that character, that idea of a coming out of the closet story, the sub story, and we put that in this film. So that's how it started. And then of course themes and layers started to evolve. It's not something that all of that doesn't happen before you start. You have a few ideas, you have a beginning, middle, and end. You know what the characters are looking for, and then slowly you start to bring in theme, layering. In fact, if you ask me, I think theme only came into the project maybe in draft 2. By the end of draft 2 is when I started to kind of bring the theme in, and then it started to kind of, layering a film is a process that takes multiple drafts. It's not something that can happen in the first draft. First draft, you're just trying to get its nuts and bolts right. You're just trying to get somewhat of a framework for a story, and as you start to then see it more clearly, you try to add more layers, one layer at a time. Sometimes you give one layer to a character, to every character you give one layer, then you start to bring a theme into it, and then you try the theme into every scene. So it's a process that happens over a few drafts. So it's not something that you think of in one go and then go do the film. At least I don't work that way. Actually, no. The thing is, whenever you're making a film, you're just trying to bring your present self to that film. Who you are at this point in your life should reflect in your film. So if you ask me to make Ek Main Aur Ek Tu today, I don't think I can make that film, because I don't think I connect to that world and that kind of storytelling or a mind space or a headspace for that story today. So your story reflects your headspace and your being at that point. So I think it's tough to say what would I like to repeat. I just like to be my authentic self every time I make a film. You ask yourself, what do I feel in this point as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, even as a person, and then how do you kind of communicate that in a story? So I don't know. I guess if you are repeating yourself, then also have to say, Woody Allen repeats his characters sometimes, sometimes character arcs, sometimes his tropes, but his movies are still very entertaining. So maybe there's something to repeat, but I think it's too early in my career to be thinking about repeating. I think I just do want to keep exploring more and new. So I don't know. I read a very interesting quote once, and it said, your movies don't necessarily need a happy ending, but they need a satisfying ending. And I think that's the difference, is if you stop thinking, you don't necessarily need to come to a happy ending. You need to find, what do these characters need? The characters you're writing, what do they need to give their story a closure, a defining arc? And sometimes that's not always a happy thing. Some of the nicest stories or storytelling that was done was in Greek tragedy, and Greek tragedies don't have happy endings. I think most of my favorite films don't necessarily have like a conventional happy ending, and I think that's why when I'm also thinking of like, how else can you end a film so that it's satisfying but not necessarily the way the audience would have expected it. And I think most of the time when the audience walks into the film, they hope for a happy ending, but if you can give them a satisfying ending, not a happy ending, then that's also an additional surprise that works for them. What did I keep in mind while choosing scenes? No, I think I was just trying to find a progression of the story. So, after Rajat's character dies in the film, I was just trying to think of what's the natural progression for the film, and that became the song, And it's not that I had the song first and then I made the visuals. I knew what the scenes were, I knew what the progression would be, and then we composed the song. I'd already shot those scenes, and then once I put it together in the timeline, then we composed the song to fit on those visuals. So that's how I went about it. So I think how you choose what goes in a song is what should happen in the story. Yes, it was my decision, because I think I realized that obviously there was a version of the film that could have happened without the songs. But I felt like I needed to make a family film, so bring as many people into the cinema hall and then surprise them with what the film's about. So in the beginning, you are giving them all the conventions they are used to. So they feel that they're coming to watch something that they understand and know, but then you drop in a few surprises. So I think that's how I think even my attempt in the first film was. Like, you try give people what they think they know or they understand, and they be like, I know exactly where this is going. And you're like, okay, what if now I start to surprise you a little bit? And I also think, given the circumstances at that time, it allowed me to make the film, at a slightly bigger budget. It wasn't a big budget film, but it gave me a little more leeway in terms of how I wanted to shoot, So that, but I do agree with you, there's a version of the film which is without songs. Is it better? I don't know. But it's done. And I think I'm just grateful that people still ended up connecting to it. So, That's a question a director always asks themselves. Like, how do you want to shoot? Where's the camera going to be? How are you going to block a scene? Because I think blocking a scene can change how a scene feels. It can give energy to the writing. And I think with Kapoor and Sons, even before I was writing the film, I was thinking about the kind of texture and tone and the feeling that I wanted. And I wanted a feeling of chaos and, people constantly moving about. So while writing, I was constantly writing the scenes with that rhythm in my head, that people are going to be moving in and out, and they're going to be not stuck in one place. They're going to be walking and, going from one room to the other, going into the bathroom, coming out. And so that was my maxim. Even before I went to, really revise my drafts, I knew that's what I wanted. How do I go about blocking a scene? I think every scene on paper has a certain rhythm, and as a director, you're trying to catch hold of that rhythm, so that it feels more authentic. I find it very unreal when two people just stand in front of each other and talk. Especially in a house, people don't talk like that. One of the questions you ask yourself is what would this feel like if this was a real thing? If this was not a film but it was real, what would it feel like? And then you try and capture that, and that's where blocking comes in handy. And then obviously, you sit down, you speak to your cameraman, you speak to your actors, and try to give energy a scene that gives it a movement. And that's what all cinematography is about. Is they overlap, directing and cinematography overlap at some point, and I think that's where blocking comes in. Yes, I can. Of course, Woody Allen's inspired me a lot. I don't know about influence my work, but it's a lot of inspiration that I take from his work. I love how conversations kind of lead his storytelling, but there's like an underlying plot in his films. There are a lot of filmmakers apart from Woody Allen that I love. Of course, there's Billy Wilder, there's Vincent Minnelli, Preston Sturges, Howard Hawks. These are the old school guys that I love, and then they're the independent directors. Who made Harold and Maude? I forget his name. Then there's Peter Bogdanovich. Of the new guys, of course, there's Scorsese and Spielberg, and now I guess even Noah Baumbach. I've been watching these filmmakers for a very long time, and it's not necessarily how many filmmakers inspire you and influence you, how many films you watch. It's also like watching the one thing multiple times, trying to understand how they're doing it, which makes the difference. It's you don't necessarily have to follow the same filmmakers I'm following. You can follow what connects with you, and whatever connects with you, you just got to understand how they are doing it, and once you start to see their craft and how they are working it, you can kind of adapt that. It's like magic. When you are watching it as an audience, you don't know how it's going on. You can enjoy it, but you don't know how it's being done. But once you start to understand the craft of it, you can do it, and you can create your own little tricks with that, with those tricks. So I think it's important to watch things a couple of times, multiple times, and start picking up on how they're doing it. I don't see myself as the pioneer of mumblecore. I think mumblecore, if you truly, strictly define the genre, I don't think even Kapoor and Sons is a mumblecore film. It's really kind of making it in a whole different way. Sometimes there's no script. You are collaborating with actors in a different way. Sometimes you're shooting in your own houses, very real houses. It's somewhat of a extension or a rehash of Dogma. So I don't think we are doing much mumblecore in India. I hope we do. It's an interesting genre, and it's just interesting device for filmmakers. But I don't think we have enough audience for that. But I think with Netflix and Amazon, hopefully there'll be attempts to kind of do that right. And I'm always excited by people who are trying something new in filmmaking. They're not necessarily sticking to the conventions, and they're trying to figure out how they want to do it. So I'm not a pioneer in mumblecore, but I definitely enjoy the genre, and I hope more people do it in India. Luggage has a purpose. The reason Fawad ends up knowing that the script is in the bag is because Arjun had lost his luggage and it didn't arrive on time, and when it arrived, the lock is broken, and that's why Fawad ends up opens the luggage and realizes the script's in it. So when he pulls out the script later, he knows where the script is. So that was the purpose of the luggage, and the luggage being lost, and hopefully it all adds up. But that's what it was. I actually started shooting commercials after I had already finished my first feature film. But I was an assistant director on many commercials. I've assisted Ram Madhwani Shujat, Uzair, bunch of ad filmmakers, that's where I started actually. So advertising is not something that's alien to me, and I really enjoy it. I love advertising. It's storytelling in a very different form. Its craft is slightly different. Its storytelling is different because you're really trying to communicate everything within 30 seconds, and you're trying to figure out. And a lot of it is not about shooting it. A lot of it is about it's in the writing of it. How do you communicate a point in 30 seconds? It's in the writing and not so much in the shooting. Of course, you have to have coverage that can cut together within 30 seconds. What it does for me is it allows me to improve my speed. If I can shoot more, it just keeps me. I don't feel so rusty. I feel like I'm practicing, and so it's like a warm up. It's a good warm up, and sometimes very, very challenging too. So it keeps you on your toes. It keeps you thinking as a filmmaker, and I definitely enjoy it. Yeah. That's the most challenging part about writing. The most challenging part about writing is not writing. The most challenging part about writing is to be able to sit every day on the table and fight the tick in you which wants to do something. It's like waiting for something to hit you, come, and you prepare for it. And it's a very difficult process for me. Every time I go back into writing, it takes me, I'm not joking, more than a month, couple of months to just get back into a place where I can start to form a good discipline. But it's all about discipline. I don't think you can ever write a film, no matter how talented you are, or have a writing career, no matter how talented you are, unless you can hone your discipline and be able to sit down, think, write. I ask myself this question every time. Is like, it's so tough. What if I can't do it the next time? But sometimes you just have to go back. Your bank balance goes down, and you're like, okay, it's time I sit down. I have my favorite films, as I said, a lot of Woody Allen films, which I go back to. There are a whole bunch of other films that I go back to. But what's crucial is for you to pick what you want to go back to, not, as you've written, what's the film that I'd want other film students to go back to. I think it's tough. It's tough for me to say which ones they should go back to, is because they have to see what's connecting with them, and they have to go back to that film and constantly see why and how it's done that it's pulling them in. And you have to understand that trick. How's the filmmaker doing it that it keeps pulling you back in? As I said, for me, it's a lot of Woody Allen films. It's Annie Hall, Hannah Sisters. All those films are really, really fascinating for me. And many more. I think these are just the Woody Allen films that I've named. But many more that I absolutely love. But it's very personal. I never looked for someone else's recommendation for what should I be watching. I know a lot of people would say Godfather, and I have only watched The Godfather twice. I'll make a really embarrassing confession. I have not seen Star Wars. And I saw Jaws very late in the day. I saw E.T. very late in the day. And those are movies I've seen maybe once, twice, not more than that. But for some, those movies are everything. And I think if that's the movie that speaks to you, then you got to go watch that film. Don't look for recommendations. Whatever you connect with, go rewatch it and try to understand how they've done it. Even when you watch a bad film, try to see why it's not working. Why doesn't it connect? Go read the reviews. Go see like technical analysis of that film online, and just see what connects, what doesn't connect. Well, that's the question I asked myself when this thing started, and it was kind of difficult to figure out what's the best way. And I think now I've broken my time a certain way. I still go back to my film and try and improve it, see things that I can change or revise that'll help it a little better, try and visualize it a little more. But I'm also trying to now use this time to expose myself to other material, read and watch movies and catch up on things I haven't had the time to, and at the same time try and ideate, try and think of other ideas that I'd probably like to do. That takes the time to commit to, but I'm hoping I can use this time for that. Well, you don't approach a scene necessarily as a director only. First, you approach a scene as a writer, and for that, it's basically what is the purpose of the scene? What is it trying to achieve? Is it only there just to make people laugh, or is it funny, or is there a progression of story that it helps with? And I think you need to ask yourself, what's the purpose of the scene? As a director, as a writer, once that is done, how I approach a scene visually is different, which is as a director on set. Then for me, it's tone. What's the tone of the film? And I think tone is something very difficult to explain. It's like a taste. I can't tell you what taste is. You know it, but it's tough to explain. It's tone is like the way you want to tell the story. It's very subjective. It's in your mind. This is the texture. This is the sur. This is the pitch of the film. And as a director, you're trying to keep that as a constant reminder. And then comes rhythm, pace, blocking. All those things. Are you looking to kind of accentuate the emotion, hold back? But I think one of the most important thing is, which I think learned from Billy Wilder interview or books, is that how would it feel in reality? And I think that's a question you ask yourself sometimes as writers, sometimes as a director. How would it feel in real life? And you try, if you're telling a real story, and then you try find a way of getting close to that authenticity, and that could be through camera, blocking, wardrobe, music, background music, what kind of lensing. I think all those questions come into it, but I think a lot of it comes from knowing what you want to say and how you want it to feel. No, because I'm kind of involved in the writing of it. I think by the time I get to the shoot, I'm not necessarily breaking it down. I've already done that exercise as a writer, and I don't have a process, but I do constantly ask myself, what is it doing to the story? What is it trying to achieve? Where are the characters in the story at this given point? Because you're shooting out of out of chronology, you're shooting non-linear, so you have to constantly remind yourself where these characters are mentally, emotionally. I think that's a very important part for me. And then second part is that in terms of pace and rhythm in the film, where does it fall? What's the rhythm of the scene? What's the graph? How intense is this scene supposed to be in the growth of your story? And those are the things that you generally have to ask yourself as a director, and I think those are the questions that help you make choices. I think yes, everyone knows directing is all about choices, but what are the things that help you make those choices? And I think these are the questions that get you closer to the answer on those. Yeah, first thing first is, read a lot, watch stuff on YouTube, acquaint yourself with how films are made, so you can see, there's a difference between loving the idea of watching movies and loving the idea of making movies. They are two very different things. Yes, I think it's important that you love movies before you start making them, but it's not necessarily because you love watching them, you love making them. And I think first question you have to be really genuine and authentic with yourself is, do you love making films? And I think you get a taste of it if you see filmmaking interviews, making offs, and you see if you're curious about it. If you're curious about it, read a couple of books. Then obviously the next step is to try get an internship, try wherever, try, or go to film school where you can try, kind of test the waters, and then get an internship. And then you really have to slog for people to trust you, see that you have the talent, and then you gotta, you find your script, write a script, be able to pitch it, go to producers, go to stars, try and convince them that you have something that's worth it, and you can't convince it unless it's on the page. So I think there's a journey, but I think where it starts is definitely by curiosity, love, being intrigued, and then trying to reach out to people and say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I've done. And nowadays, if you've made a short film on even on your phone, created content, even if it's small, 1 minute, 2 minutes, I think that could work as a great reel for you to show somebody that you are genuinely interested. Great question in today's time, but I've never made a remake or an adaptation, so it's tough for me to say, tough for me to answer the latter. But the the first part, what are your views about adaptation and remakes? My views is that if you truly have something to add, it depends why you're doing a remake or an adaptation, right? Are you purely doing it because you are lazy and you do not have ideas and you can't come up with something that's original? Then sure, it's the lazy way out, and fine, you can do it. You can make a film, you can get paid, and sure, the people might even go out watch it. Number two can be that you're really passionate about that one story. It talks to you. It feels like it's you who needs to tell that story, and there's something about it that pulls you into it. And you want to do a different version of it, and that's great. I think that's fine. If a story speaks to you that closely that you want to do an homage by remaking it, or you want to do it purely because it talks to you so closely that you think you can do it in your own way, that's great. And three is if you can bring something new to it. I think that's, for me, is the highest level of making an adaptation, is where you take something. There's a Nora Ephron film called You've Got Mail, which is a remake of a film called I forget what's the. I know it's a Ernst Lubitsch film, a black and white film. Shop Around the Corner. Shop Around the Corner is remade into You've Got Mail by Nora Ephron, and you can see that she's taking everything, but she's making everything her own, and she's adding her own surprises. And for me, I think that's the true way of doing a remake. So if you are thinking, then I would suggest bring something new to it. Well, that's one question, but that one question is everything. It takes you a year to really come to knowing what it takes to write a script. It's no one thing. It's discipline, it's clarity, it's trying to dig deeper, it's your interest in the story, it's the curiosity, it's something that keeps pulling you back into it. It's the central question that keeps pulling you back, and it's the theme that wants to make you work harder to be able to communicate it. The one thing a person should keep in mind while writing a film script and the screenplay is that discipline is important and rewrites are essential. And I think that's very important. Those two things are extremely crucial, and you have to be extremely honest to yourself about what's working and what's not working. It's very easy, people tend to fall in love with their own material, and it's very easy to overlook the problems. And I think that's where you could go wrong. It's like, that's why it's also important to keep getting a little bit of feedback from maybe just 2 or 3 people, but to understand where you stand. And I think that's crucial, is to constantly take a perspective of where you are and what all needs to be improved or changed or thrown out or put in. And then, even though it's a lot of hard work, you have to go back into it. You have to put in the hours. Well, it can get tough, it can get tricky, but I think it depends on your relationship, it depends on your dynamics, and I think it also depends on your capability as a director, which is also of prime importance, is to be able to give people a clear vision and why it is the way it is. I don't necessarily like overdoing it. I don't necessarily like to sit down and break down everything for people. I think most actors are intelligent. They can read the script and understand the logic and the emotion behind it. And if they have some questions, you try and sit down and resolve it. I think one of the things that I've understood better is sometimes it's better to resolve it one-on-one and not in a group. Because I think once you get in a group, then sometimes the dynamics can play slightly differently, and you don't necessarily always want yourself in that position. I think you can have a much cleaner conversation and you can, when you are just 2 people or 3 people. But once you go into 5 or 6, it's important to kind of address everyone's concern one person at a time. Also, if everyone has the same concern, that means you are wrong, and then you have to accept it, go back and fix it. So I think that is something also one has to be cognizant of. So that All right, it was great fun answering these questions. These were actually some of the most intelligent questions I've answered in a long time. And I hope it's been helpful. And I hope whatever you guys are working on or writing, good luck with that. And I hope we all come out of this quarantine with something that we are proud of. Even if it's a little idea, even if it's a one pager, I hope we can come out of it with something. It'll be good. Good luck.